I've been a writer most of my adult life. I honestly could not have told you when I started writing this book what happened in the middle.
Can you tell us a little bit about your process? Because I know that, at least in my experience when working with people who are attempting to write, getting them to write is the hardest part of the process, it seems.
That's what got me through some of the really challenging, harder parts of being an author.
Welcome to Fyght Talk. My name is Christian Young. Welcome to Fyght Talk. My name is Christian Young. Reading is fundamental. Have you ever wanted to write a book? Do you know what you have to do in order to get it published? Do you understand the concept of writing a business case for your book? Today, we're going to spend some time with an author, and she's going to walk us through the process that she went through in order to write and also publish her book. I think that this is going to be a very interesting episode because an author is a different type of an entrepreneur. It's not that you have a specific company that's doing a multitude of things. It's really about the business of a single book. So we're going to talk about the process from end to end of writing a book, coming up with the idea, understanding what the writing process is, really going out to pitch that book to publishing houses, and then what happens after the book is published. How does it all work? How does it work for people who may not have a New York Times bestseller in their resume? So we look forward to you joining us on this journey and understanding what it takes to be an author. Hello, today we are here with Anne Morrissy, author of Street Fyght. It's a book about the taxicab wars in the 1920s in Chicago. Hi, Anne.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So I'm excited to talk about this topic today because I think that, when you think about the concept of entrepreneurship, it's a diaspora of different types of entrepreneurship. And in my opinion, I think that you are a business within yourself because of this would not be here without you. So can you tell us a little bit about your book?
For sure, yeah. So this book is sort of the culmination of a very long dream and goal that I had. I've been a writer most of my adult life. I've worked in various industries. I've worked in advertising. I've worked in magazines. I've worked, doing a lot of research-based projects, actually. So research-based sort of nonfiction writing has always been a passion of mine. And this story has been one that's kind of always been in the back of my mind through all of these different, journeys I've been on, mostly because I have a family connection to the story itself. So my great-grandfather was a man named Charlie Gray. He actually started out way back in the early 1900s when cars were a brand new technology. He started out as a cab driver. And he eventually worked his way all the way up to become president of the Yellow Cab Company in Chicago, partly because he was very close friends with John Hertz, who was one of the co-founders of the Yellow Cab Company. So he rises up to become president. He's president for about 2 years, and then he dies under kind of mysterious circumstances at the height of the taxi wars. And it was always kind of rumored in my family that he might have been a victim of foul play, that this was not just an accident as it was purported to be. So this story has been sort of percolating in the back of my head for, most of my life, honestly. So that was kind of what really motivated me to start thinking about actually turning that into a book and making that, a real project. It turned out that there were no other books on this topic that I could find. Initially I started out thinking, well, there must be a book about this already, because once you start digging into the taxi wars of the 1920s, there were a lot of very crazy, violent things happening on the streets, and there was a lot of political intrigue and, mob stuff going on. And so I thought this must be a book already. And I couldn't find one about it at all. And they tell you, as a writer, if you can't find the book you want to read, that means you have to write it.
Right. So this is interesting to me because when I think about writing a book, I have some clients who are into that. And usually we start with, of course, the standard, like what's it going to be about, so on and so forth. But the process, like, can you tell us a little bit about your process? Because I know that, at least in my experience when working with people who are attempting to write, getting them to write is the hardest part of the process, it seems.
Yes, that is definitely a challenge. So it's a little bit different for nonfiction versus fiction. So it depends on what sort of book you're looking to write. I would guess in most of your clients' cases, they're looking to write maybe a memoir or something business related. And in that case, that would be nonfiction. So the thing with nonfiction books is that you essentially, if you're trying to get it traditionally published, you essentially are asked to create what's called a book proposal, which is essentially a business case for your book. You're essentially asked to sort of explain what the book's topic will be, to give the publisher an idea of what the layout of the book might be. So in this case, it was an outline of all the chapters. They ask you to hand in a sample chapter so that they can get a sense of what the style of writing will be and what it will sound like. And then they ask you to look for other books on the topic in the market and sort of like who would the readers be that would want to buy this book and what other books are those readers buying. So there's a whole sort of template that you can use to come up with this book proposal, which is essentially a business case for a book, which I found very useful. And that's kind of where I started my process, was thinking, well, let's see if I can put together a book proposal that meets all of these criteria. Let's see if I can defend, my topic and come up with a sort of structuring concept and defend why I would be the right person to write this book. And when I got to the end of that process, it was like, oh yeah, I can definitely, now I have the roadmap in front of me as to, I wasn't just going to sit down and start writing. I was going to use this as my roadmap now. And that was really what I found the most helpful.
So I think that, when you talk about this, it's almost as though for every book that you would write, you have to almost write a business plan. So it's like every single book is its own business.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So then when you were, going through your writing process, after you kind of got to, because you're published, congratulations.
Thank you.
So you're published. So someone saw your plan and was like, this plan works for us. So then what was next? Like, what was your process? Did you just start writing immediately? Did you have to, kind of meet with the team that you were going to be working with to understand them? Was there someone calling you being like, did you get your pages in? Like, how does that work?
That is sort of what you might see on TV as how writing a book works, which is what I had seen as well. So I sort of thought that was what it was going to be like. What I discovered, I went with the largest independent publisher. So it's not one of the big three. It's an independent publisher, but a very large one. So if you go with any of those large companies, either the big three publishers or a larger independent publisher, they have hundreds, maybe thousands of authors on their roster that they're working with. So unless you're one of their top selling authors, you're kind of just, I signed the contract with the publisher and they said, okay, great, hand in the manuscript in 18 months. And that was the end of that conversation. Honestly, they never once checked in to be like, how's it going? They never once, wanted me to prove that I was doing anything during that. They just assumed that I had signed a contract with them, that I would hand in a deliverable on a certain date, and that I would hand in that deliverable then. So I really was on my own to stay motivated and to stay on track during that 18-month period. As I was lucky in that I am a deadline-oriented person, and I was able to set some internal deadlines for myself and really stick to those deadlines. Other people probably have tricks where, maybe you ask your agent to check in with you periodically, or maybe you are doing a writing group and you are meeting once a month with other writers to share your work or get feedback, or, whatever that might look like. If I had to do it again, I might actually join a writer's group. I think that would have been made it a little easier on me. But luckily, I was completely on my own through that process, and it was very isolating and very challenging, but I was able to stay on task for that period.
So how do you, one of the things with any business is that there tend to be pivots. Now, your business for this book was set up so that you kind of knew the end before you started to a certain extent. Were there pivots? Like, was there a shift? Was there one point where you were writing and you were like, I thought, but no more?
Yes. So I kind of did know the end only because I knew I was working toward this period, and it was the same period that my great-grandfather had died during that period. So I sort of knew what happened in that period. And I knew kind of what happened in the beginning because I had done some of that research for the book proposal and written an earlier chapter for the book proposal. I honestly could not have told you when I started writing this book what happened in the middle. I knew that there was a lot. I had done enough research to know that there was something to write about in the middle, but I did not know the extent of it. And honestly, it was shocking, and it was really kind of fun to uncover it as I was going. Some of the the story is essentially about Yellow Cab versus another big cab company in the city, Checker Taxi. Checker Taxi ends up in the middle of this process having a whole civil war within its own company. There's two factions that are both trying to take over the Checker Taxi company, and one of those factions is aligned with the North Side gangs in the city. And so there's this whole mob element that comes in that I didn't even discover until I started actually doing the writing of the book. So there were all these discoveries along the way. And I always tell people, like, there's, a metaphor about how you can drive a journey of 1,000 miles in the dark with your headlights on, only seeing 10 feet in front of you the whole way. And that is how I felt writing this book. Yep. I mean, I knew I was going to get to this end destination, and I did not have any idea what was in between, but you can only have to see about 10 feet in front of you at any given time, and then that'll take you to the next point. And it was really almost kind of fun to uncover all of that in that way.
This book sounds like a movie. That actually kind of gives me another question, because when I think about, entrepreneurship or businesses and things like that, there's usually an end game where people are like, and not everyone has the same end game. Like, a lot of people think that from an entrepreneurship lens, like, everybody gets in this to become like the biggest of whatever. I want to be a billionaire. I want to, eventually like have a conglomerate. I want to, have a movie. And I think that there's a lot of differences. Like, some people just want to, finish. Some people want to, be able to do something that will sustain their lives or give them a little bit of extra pocket money. When you think about this book, what is your end game?
So you're not the first person to say it sounds like a movie. Almost everybody that I tell about this book to, or who has read the book, is like, oh my gosh, you should send this to Martin Scorsese. He would love it. Right? Like, it reads like a movie, honestly, because the story is very dramatic and cinematic. And so it's not that I set out with the intention of writing something, and I think it's good to dream big, but I didn't set out with the intention of writing something that would read like a movie. That was never my goal. Honestly, my goal was very much centered around, because I had this family connection to the story, I would sort of tell people about this at dinner parties or whatever, and nobody that I spoke with had ever heard of the Taxi Wars. It was a period of Chicago history that had just completely gotten lost along the way. Because I lost a family member to it, that kind of tugged at me in a way that I felt like people should at least remember that this happened, right? And then when ride shares came in and they said, oh, we don't think we should have to follow any of the taxi regulations in the city of Chicago or in cities around the country, I felt like we were too cavalier as a culture and just sort of said, oh, okay, that's fine. And I sensed that we said it too easily and that we didn't understand where those regulations came from, and that those regulations were put in place during the 1920s in Chicago as consumer protection against some of the violence that was happening. So I felt like very called to tell this story for personal reasons, and then also because I am at my core a historian, and it sort of hurt me that people had forgotten this big important history that we were now sort of wrestling with again in a different way. So for me, the goal was honestly just to finish the book and get it out there and to see it in bookstores and to have it available at libraries so that this history wouldn't be forgotten. And so for me, as soon as the book came out, I felt like I had won that was my end goal, and I had won it. But if it were to go on and do even more things beyond that, that would be great too.
I honestly think it's a very interesting story because I traveled a lot in my prior career, and one of the places that I went was Santiago, Chile. And when I got there, I called an Uber, and they asked me to sit in the front seat. And I was like, why?
That's weird.
And they were like, because if the taxi drivers see us, it will be a problem. Like, they had a lot of problems. There was a lot of like static between those two groups, some violence, you know, and things like that. So when I hear this story, I think it, you know, resonates as you see, you know, essentially people trying to protect their business.
Yes.
And it turning into something that can be fairly substantial, either from a violent point of view or from just a shift within an industry.
Yes, absolutely.
So now the book came out. You know, you went through your writing process, which takes a lot of discipline, especially like that. Like I will admit, I thought it was how it happens on television, where there's somebody calling you every week to be like, where are your pages at? And, you know, it's all fancy, like television makes it seem. But when the book came out, like, I would assume there was like a marketing and advertising push. And while you were, you know, supported by your publisher, like, how did that work for you?
Yes. So the publisher did assign a marketing specialist to my book, and he reached out early on and was really great about kind of sending around early copies to media outlets that were possibly interested, a lot of them Chicago-based media outlets. So I was able to do some interviews prior to the book even releasing based on the work that the publisher had done. The publisher, once the book is out, is sort of leaves it up to the author to extend that, right? So as soon as the book came out, I started calling around to bookstores because I was hoping to be able to do like a book release, book signing. And I had a great response from the people at Madison Street Books in the West Loop, and they were really lovely, and they set up a whole reading for me. But then it was on me to publicize that reading and to generate people to come to that reading. And so, you know, it was much more hands-on, the process of sort of marketing the book once it was published and getting the word out about it has been much more hands-on and much more kind of person to person than I expected it to be. I have been really lucky that all of my friends have really embraced this book and have really found it, you know, kind of an interesting story, I guess, and wanted to share it with other friends of theirs. And so through my networks, I have been able to get all kinds of book signings and readings and interviews. But I really did work my own network to be able to do that. And I did not necessarily expect the extent to which it would be entirely on me to schedule everything and to you know, sort of put myself out there in that way, which I was a little, I want to say, I guess I was a little uncomfortable with it at first, but, you know, I feel so strongly about the topic and about wanting to share the story that I really tried to focus on that and really tried to get word out about the story, because I think it is a story that's important to tell. And I think that it is a story that people really find fascinating.
So you essentially had to have your own, like, so you wrote this business plan for the book, and the publisher kind of, and I'm assuming, so definitely correct me if I'm wrong, publisher kind of takes care of making sure it looks like this when it comes out. You know, it's nice, it's hardbound, it has, you know, a jacket, all those other things, and then helps to get it into stores, I'm assuming.
Yes. So my publisher did a beautiful job with cover design and with layout. And I mean, I could not say more nice things about how the book turned out. I was very, very pleased. They also assigned a line editor, a copy editor to it, who was very thorough and did a great job going through and making sure that I crossed all my T's and dotted all my I's and all of that good stuff. They definitely have been very helpful, as I said, with the early marketing efforts as well. But they are, I mean, they have a lot of authors on their roster, right? So they are doing this for a lot of different people at different times, and, you know, they are being helpful in the ways that they can be helpful. The distribution network is one way that they can be helpful, because they do have a partnership with a distribution network that gets the book into bookstores. You can honestly buy this book at any bookstore in America. If they don't have it in stock, they can order it.
Right.
So that was really the biggest benefit that I got from publishing traditionally.
And then you know, once you kind of get over the first initial kind of like phase, are responsible for kind of carrying this through. So you have to kind of be your operations team and say, I want this book to continue on. I just don't want this initial kind of launch and flatline. I want to make sure that it continues having life breathed into it. So you are the life.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. I feel like I am the person who has to go and like sort of remind the bookstores to restock it when it gets sold out. I'll just stop in and say, hey, you know, I'm a local author and I would love to sign any copies of my book that you have in stock. And if they don't have it in stock, then I say, oh, okay, well, let me know if you get it back and I'll come back and sign it. Right. So just little things like that where, you know, you really are the engine for your own book, which is, you know, your baby kind of. Right. So that has been really fun in a way because I get to go and share it with people in lots of different places and lots of different ways. But yes, you do kind of have to stay on top of that and stay with it. So, I mean, the book came out a year ago and I'm still doing signings. I'm still talking about it. I'm still getting asked to do readings, which is great. And I love that. And I did not expect it to be still happening a year later. So I feel very lucky.
So what would you, when you think about, you know, all of the, you know, the bookstores and, you know, initially everyone always thinks like Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, you know, like those groups, how, and all of that. And I think that like one of the things that I'm hearing is that you have been kind of brought into this like community of authors and bookstores. And how is the independent kind of bookstore played out as a factor within this whole process?
Yeah, I mean, I was already a huge fan of bookstores before this. I actually had volunteered at a local used bookstore in Chicago called Open Books, so I had some contacts in the bookstore community through that experience. And the bookstore community is just a really wonderful group of people in Chicago. So, you know, independent bookstores have definitely been a big part of helping me get the word out. I've done several readings at them. As I mentioned, I did a book release party at Madison Street Books, which is an independent bookstore in Chicago. I've also had a lot of luck with Barnes & Noble, honestly. Like, they have opened some new stores in Chicago in the past year. And I've been invited to do book signings at the openings for a couple of those as well. So they have a great sort of on the ground team to work with local authors, even though they are a larger company. So I love the book community in Chicago, whether it's independent or whether it's a little more corporate. I just think that people who love books and people who love Chicago, the intersection of those two interests makes for a really great group of people and a really great community. And I've felt really, you know, welcomed by it.
So outside of the, like, you know, the readings and kind of doing the in-store events, what has been your level of interaction with your community, the readers, your customers? Yeah,
you know, it's fun because I, through my website, I will sometimes get emails from readers. You know, obviously, if it's a friend or a friend of a friend who's read the book, then I will get feedback directly from those people, you know, and that's always wonderful as well. But it's been really neat to hear from, you know, just random people in the world who have found this book one way or another and reached out to tell me, you know, oh, you know, my grandfather was a cab driver in the 1920s, or, you know, everybody seems to have a sort of a story or a connection to it if you're from Chicago, because it's such a Chicago story and there's so many different things that are happening in the book. You know, with the Chicago politics of the time and the urban transportation and infrastructure of the time. Everybody seems to have a connection somehow to the story. I mean, even just this morning, I met a woman who said, oh, you know, I used to work for the city and I worked with the taxi cab medallion system. And so everybody seems to have some connection to it and they love to sort of share that story. So I've heard from lots of people and it's been fun.
Okay. So when you think about like the future for yourself, you know, this is a business, it'll last forever now that, you know, it's in print and things like that. Is there any thought towards another business?
You know, so this story, I felt really called to tell this story. And that's what got me through some of the really challenging, harder parts of being an author. I mean, I think we don't talk enough about how isolating it can be to sit alone in a room for 18 months and really immerse yourself in some kind of dark stories. So it was a challenge to get this book out into the world. I stuck with it because I felt really strongly that it was a story that needed to be told. I haven't found that story yet that I feel like is the next story that I can't put down, that I can't ignore. But if I find it and when I find it, I hope that there will be another opportunity to do that.
Now, one of the things that you just were saying is, some of this can be very isolating. Some of the content can be a little bit dark. I believe earlier you mentioned when we were having another conversation that you have this concept of Self-Care Tuesdays.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's something I kind of developed in the process of writing the book because it was challenging to hold a day job and then also be writing a book in my evenings and my weekends. And so as a way to sort of help balance my very busy work schedule, I developed this concept of Self-Care Tuesdays. And I would try to schedule anything that was just like for my mental health or for my physical health, I would try to schedule it on a Tuesday. So I would go to Pilates every Tuesday morning. If I needed to go to a doctor's appointment, I would schedule those on Tuesday mornings. If I was getting a massage, I would get that on a Tuesday. So I just sort of tried to make that my day, that I tried to really focus on me and get that balance and keep that balance for the long haul, because I knew it was going to be, writing a book is a marathon, not a sprint.
So when we think about that marathon, so you went to an independent publisher and essentially kind of outsourced a part of your team, and they kind of took on some of that role. What are your thoughts around the whole concept of publishing, self-publishing, be it via, an Amazon tool or, just kind of going and paying somebody to print it up? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that self-publishing is amazing. I think what people are able to do now with self-publishing is not that vastly different from what you're able to do with a traditional publisher. The piece that you end up doing more on your own is the sort of getting the word out and spreading, so the traditional publishers are doing more distribution for you, which means they have placement in local bookstores. You as a self-published author would have to call a lot of local bookstores or a lot of national bookstores and say, here's this topic, here's why you want to carry it. And you'd have to do a little more persuading on your part, I think, because bookstores are still sort of primed to order books from traditional publishers. That said, if you have a following on social media, if you have your own business already that you have, that you could sort of fold your book sales into an existing population of people that's interested in what you're doing, then I think self-publishing can be amazing. I mean, you honestly make the same amount of money per book, roughly, that you sell if you are self-published versus if you're traditionally published. It's just, as you said, you have, with the traditional publishers, you have a little bit more of an infrastructure already built into it. And as a self-published author, that's going to be more on you to sort of get the word out and get people to sign on with selling and buying that book.
That sounds like a lot of work either way.
Yes.
So when you think about, this entire process, where would you say are the most important points where you would think that someone who's aspiring to kind of have their own business, being an author or selling books or any of those things that are associated with the entire process, would need help?
So I think that one thing I would say is, I worked with an agent. Unfortunately, that relationship did not last very long for me. And I think that was one of the bigger challenges for me, was that I did not have that sort of trusted person who's been in the industry, who can kind of answer some of the more logistical questions or just sort of be your cheerleader when you need a cheerleader. I really missed that. She was helpful in the beginning. She did help me get a book contract. And then after that, we sort of parted ways, not under the best circumstances. And that was something I really felt I was, hamstrung by not having that person that is sort of a go-to mentor, I guess, to sort of help you through that journey of writing a book. A good agent would almost be like a doula to help you birth this book, right? And I really felt like I could have used a little bit of that expertise through this process. So I would encourage people, even if you're not sure you want to do the traditional publishing route, to find somebody like that, whether it's an agent or, somebody in the industry who's done this a few times before, who can kind of act as the mentor, just to be there when you have questions that, seem sort of, maybe you're like, oh, I feel like I should know this, but I don't. And who can I ask, right? It helps to have sort of a person that can be your guide through that.
And when you're thinking about who you can ask, because one of the things that you were just talking, this kind of triggered in me, is the thought around the fact that everyone's an expert. It's like you see online or through different ads and things like that, people saying, you can write this book in 3 weeks, or I can write this book for you with just a single conversation, or, there's a lot of business behind the business of creating a business.
Yes.
And so what are your kind of thoughts and perspective on that aspect? Because I think trying to find someone who you can trust, who actually really knows and really will guide you through is probably fairly tough.
Yeah, I would say that is probably true as well. An agent is somebody who should have like an established roster of people they've worked with before. So ideally, you could kind of go and vet them that way and maybe interview some of their past clients and say, how did this go for you? So if you're looking for an agent in the traditional sense like that, then what's tricky about that is the agent has to take you on as a client, which means they have to sort of see potential in what you're working on and believe that it is something that they might be able to polish up for you and sell to a publisher. And that is how they make their money, is on a commission for doing that. So, it's that is one piece of it. There are also, as I mentioned before, there are some writers groups that I think that might be a good way to go. If you can, sort of find a writers group that is maybe specialized in the type of book that you're interested in writing or the type of writing you want to do. Maybe you would meet somebody there who's already maybe done this once. And so then they might be a little further down that path and be able to give you that advice. So that might be one way to go. Generally, I tend to think that people who are sort of advertising, I'll write a book for you in 3 weeks, on Instagram are probably not your most reliable way to find that person. But, there may be success stories out there that way too that, I tend to be a little more skeptical. So.
Okay. And then I'm thinking last question. Is there more to this story?
People have said like, oh, is there a sequel to this book? And I said, well, when you read it, I do specifically keep it to about a 15-year period in Chicago. So the 1915 to about 1930 is the time period of this book. Obviously, taxis continued to exist in the city for, decades thereafter. So, I suppose there's a version of it where there could be an update to this. I don't know that. I feel like for me personally, I have told the story that I wanted to tell with the taxi wars. I felt like I was able to find the information that told that story. And I feel like for me, I am ready to sort of maybe move on to a different topic if I find one that I feel as passionate about.
Okay. Well, but before you move on, if you would please share with the audience where they can find your book, where they can find you, where they can have not where they can find you, because that's kind of scary, where they can communicate with you and, learn a little bit more about the taxi wars between 1915 and 1930.
Yeah. So the book is available everywhere books are sold: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org is one I recommend because it uses your local bookstore to supply the books. You can also walk into your local bookstore, and if they don't have it in stock, you can ask them to order it. It is absolutely a wonderful tale of Chicago and also a business history and a kind of wild ride. So I recommend it to anybody who has interest in those things. I am online at annemorrissy.com. So my first name and my last name, you can reach out to me that way. You can also follow me on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is at Anne, ANNE, _ she's fancy, all one word.
Thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about the business of your book. We definitely appreciate it and look forward to maybe hearing about a movie one day.
Here's hoping.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Today we are here with Anne Morrissy, author of Taxi. Okay. I'm going to fix that. Because I literally looked and I was like, I know this name. And I was like, taxis. Okay.
It goes well with your podcast because street fight.
Exactly.
Fight talk,
There we
right?
go.
Yeah.